Chapter 86. Raon held his breath. What an opportunity! Receiving instruction from the strongest warrior in the continent was the best opportunity he could get, incomparable to a mere tablet. It was such a big deal that it could bring the entire House Sieghart in an uproar. Whir! Raon resonated the ring of fire, clearing his bewildered mind. You look like you are ready. I'm starting, then. Glenn's feet separated the faint moonlight covering the floor. His relaxed movement made him look like he was on a stroll, but his flow was unpredictable. He flared up from the left like a red flame, then flowed down to the right like water. Raon was unable to breathe, watching the mysterious flow his feet were creating. Glenn's footwork was extremely difficult to understand. It was fast yet slow, soft yet hard at the same time. I still need to watch until the end. Giving up because it was too difficult was out of the question, since learning just 1/10 of Glenn's teachings was already more than worth it. Raon watched him without even blinking once until he stopped moving his feet. The entrancing moment felt like an instant, and Glenn stood in front of Raon. Despite having just demonstrated a boundless footwork, his breathing remained relaxed and he didn't seem unsettled in the slightest. Did you see it? The red eyes, as sharp as a beast's, were asking him whether he had seen it properly, how much he had understood. Please excuse me. I didn't manage to see it. Raon bit his lip and lowered his head. The footwork was on a completely different level, one that couldn't be understood with only 4 rings of fire. It seemed Glenn was expecting that to happen, as he didn't show any reaction. He just looked down on him with emotionless eyes. Show me how much you understood. He pointed at the floor and stepped back. It looked like he wanted him to repeat the footwork. He will be disappointed. He saw many flows, and felt the depth of the martial art. However, there was only a very small portion he was able to replicate in his current state. He felt like he could already feel the coldness of Glenn's gaze. Then, Raon bit his lip slightly. He decided to repeat the one form that left the strongest impression, rather than awkwardly trying to replicate multiple movements. That's the first step. The unusual posture, with right foot at the front and left foot at the back, was the start of the first step. Raon decided to replicate the first step that separated the moonlight and pierced through space. Ha! Raon extended his left foot to the back and right foot to the front. His feet were shoulder-width apart. It was exactly the same posture as Glenn's, since Raon had observed it using the ring of fire. The step incorporated everything. It was fast, slow, strong, smooth, and ever-changing at the same time. It was a step that could bring him anywhere. He raised his left foot. Putting together what he'd felt from Glenn's demonstration and the principle of the martial arts he'd learned so far, he extended it to the front. Stomp! The golden moonlight covering the floor was distorted into a triangle, and an intense vibration traveled throughout the audience chamber. The step was extremely weak compared to Glenn's, but the flow was almost identical. It was the first step that could move in any direction, and in any way he wanted. Ha! Glenn narrowed his eyes, and Ren's jaw dropped. Ha! Raon exhaled and closed his eyes. He was feeling dizzy, despite having only taken a single step. He must have been too focused and nervous. Is it over after that single step? Glenn turned around, looking at Raon's extended left foot. Yes. Yes. Raon answered briefly and opened his eyes. Didn't you see more than that? It's because I can't even repeat 1/10 of it, let alone replicate it. How come you can't repeat it? My lord's footwork contained too many things, like a martial god's steps. It's impossible for my unskilled self to understand it completely. Does that mean the first step was the easiest? Glenn's voice grew as cold as the severe winter's wind. No, it wasn't. Raon continued while looking at his extended left foot. From what I saw, the first step was the most important and the most impressive. I thought I should repeat the first step, since it was more impressive than any other footwork you showed me afterwards. Why do you think the first step is the most important one? Because the step can move in any direction, at any time, and in any way one desires. It was as shocking as watching the steps of an omnipotent existence, and the step is still stuck in my head. Since it was impossible to lie to Glenn about martial arts, Raon answered honestly about what he saw and felt. Glenn slightly nodded and spread his legs. His expression remained the same, but it felt like the atmosphere had become softer. You have good instincts. He took the same posture as the beginning, extending his left foot to the back and right foot to the front. The footstep I showed you is called the Supreme Harmony Steps. Since you realized the first step, Heavenly Advance, is the most important. You are halfway there. Glenn took another step with an emotionless voice. Raon's hair stood on end upon seeing the step that could bring him anywhere in the world. Whir! His energy center vibrated, gathering his aura that controlled his body while dashing through his mana circuit. Stomp! Before he had even realized it, Raon replicated the Supreme Harmony Steps' Heavenly Advance, exactly as Glenn had shown him. It's better than before. Glenn nodded with an expressionless face, then turned around. He went up on the platform and nestled down into the throne. That's it for the reward. With that single step? I have shown you more than that, but you only managed to take one. He closed his eyes. He appeared to be saying that he had nothing more to tell. Understood. Thank you. Raon licked his lips and nodded. It wasn't a big harvest, but learning about the existence of such footsteps was an enlightenment in itself. You can have this. Glenn threw something from his hand, and Raon caught the red gem falling in front of his chest. Ah! It was the Goblin King's magic stone that he had given to Glenn earlier. Objects should belong to their rightful owner. Since it's an item you acquired, you should take it. He dusted off his hands, showing he had no regret, then closed his eyes again. You can put it in here. Ren gave him a black fabric. It was the fabric with the ability to block the magic stone's energy. Thank you. Raon wrapped the fabric around the Goblin King's magic stone and put it in his chest pocket. I didn't expect him to return this. He thought he would study it, or break it, or put it in a warehouse. He didn't expect him to return it. Glenn's every single action was different from his expectation. You shall return now. Yes, thank you. Raon stepped back. As he was about to open the audience chambers room, he felt like he should do something before leaving since he had received a lot. Air. What is it? Stay healthy. Since he had no idea what he should be telling him, he offered the most common greeting for an elder and bowed. Glenn frowned without saying anything and Ren covered his mouth with trembling hands. I'll leave now. He licked his lips and left the audience chamber. It looked like he shouldn't have said that. Stay healthy. You really looked like a fool right there. Ugh. He didn't know what to tell him since he had never sincerely thanked an elder. Phew. As he walked down the corridor while sighing, a new message appeared in front of his eyes. Ring of Fire observed the perfected Supreme Harmony Steps. Acquisition of Supreme Harmony Steps has accelerated. The audience chamber was still filled with moonlight after Raon left. Ren, who was looking at the moonlight covering the floor, raised his head. I didn't think my lord would hand over the Supreme Harmony Steps. He thought he would give a special reward because of how much he cherished Raon, but he had never imagined he would give the Supreme Harmony Steps. Because the Supreme Harmony Steps was created by none other than himself. The Supreme Harmony Steps was the first footwork he had created after breaking through the demonic wall. It was a technique that was worth more than a golden tablet, one that he hadn't even taught his sons. Considering the fact that he gave such a technique to Raon, his affection for Raon was beyond his expectations. Did you see it? Glenn slowly opened his eyes. His eyes were reflecting a sugary light, unlike a moment ago when it was simply cold. He repeated the heavenly advance after watching it only twice. Pardon? Raon. He took half of the Supreme Harmony Steps after only watching it 2 times. Isn't he amazing? It wasn't just his eyes. His voice was also higher than usual, and the corners of his mouth were clearly raised. Ha! Ren's jaw dropped. He'd been living as Glenn's shadow for decades, yet it was his first time seeing him being so happy since his first son's birth. He didn't kill the Green War demon and hold his ground against the blood-raving demon by sheer luck. He has sharp eyes, and the way he controls his body and aura is rather extraordinary. That's true. The fact that Raon managed to grasp the core of the Supreme Harmony steps in such a short time was really astonishing. But it's something else that impressed me the most. The smile on Glenn's mouth became even more clear. His judgment, right? It was really amazing how a 15-year-old managed to understand what was important and what could be thrown away. I also wanted to try teaching him if I get an opportunity. I'm not just talking about what happened today. Then, the fact that he stood against the blood-raving demon on his own in order to save everyone. Glenn continued while looking at the carpet where Raon's footsteps still remained. Raon has good instincts. He must have realized he could never win against the blood-raving demon the moment he saw him. That seems likely. Yet he stopped him until the very end. He didn't withdraw, buying time for the villagers and trainees to escape with his body broken from saving the village chief. The blood-raving demon would have turned the villagers and the trainees into a pool of blood if Raon hadn't held his ground. There weren't many people who could sacrifice themselves for the sake of others. The number of 15-year-old children capable of such a thing in the entire continent could be counted on a person's fingers. A smile appeared on Glenn's face as he rejoiced at the fact that such a great boy was his grandson. I haven't seen you smile like that in a long time. Ren smiled. KHHM. I'm not really happy. Glenn immediately lowered the corners of his lips. They were so low that he looked older than usual. Sir Raon managed to destroy the White Blood Religion's branch, and Sir Raon eliminated the Green War Demon. We are getting a series of great news. Well, it's not that great and special. Glenn's corners of lips raised slightly once again upon hearing compliments about his grandsons. Ha! Ren murmured, "Is that so?" And nodded. His mouth was still smiling happily. By the way, my lord couldn't hold back his smile when young Master Raon told you to stay healthy earlier. If you want to pretend to be cold-blooded, you should. I'm not pretending. It was rare for Glenn to shout, but the smile didn't disappear from Ren's face. What's this? This? Upon returning to the annex building, Raon pointed at the message he saw earlier. Whoosh! Wrath, who was clinging to the bracelet like a parrot, surged up into the air. It's a learning assistance. Learning? It's one of the system's aspects the King of Essence created back in Devilldom in order to learn the techniques of powerful or peculiar existences. Among the arrogant ones that picked a fight with the King of the Essence. In short, it's increasing my learning ability. Stop cutting me off. Anyway, was I right? Pretty much. How do I use it? Do you think I'm going to tell you? If you take my wrath. I don't need it, it's pretty obvious. Raon snickered and wagged his finger. It's making it easier to learn the Supreme Harmony steps. It's not even a secret. What arrogance! Wrath barked in irritation. I shall start immediately. Raon silently opened the window and went back outside. Just do it tomorrow after sunrise. I'm too lazy to follow you outside. But there might be a time limit. There's no way such a thing. It looks like I'm right, judging from the way you're talking. How could you tell? Because your reaction was strange. Wrath would have started boiling in anger, but he was only acting irritated. That was why Raon realized he was hiding something. I told you already, you are in the palm of my hand. Stop your arrogance. The King of Essence is a monarch of Devilldom, who surpasses a mere human's estimations. Wrath glared while spreading a frightening amount of coldness around him. Yes, I'm talking about that. Raon pointed at Wrath's coldness as it was expanding into the air. I wouldn't have noticed anything strange if you acted like that from the beginning. You are really easy to deal with. Raon pushed Wrath away using the flame from the ring of fire on his right hand. Damn it! You are the worst creature that the King of Essence has ever met. I guess being the worst for a demon king is a compliment, right? Cool. I'll kill you. I'll kill you no matter WH. Okay, do that later. Raon went to the training ground while listening to Wrath's cursing scream. Chapter 87. The blue moon was looking down on the world from the night sky. Inside the open area, Raon unwrapped the bandage covering his arms and legs. Though he wasn't completely recovered, the flesh had almost finished growing back. It seemed he could start training once again. Then, he smoothly kicked the ground, gathering the aura from the 10,000 flames cultivation. Raon reached around the lake in no time. It was an extremely fast footwork, one that even his shadow couldn't follow, but his expression was grim. Tisk. Raon clicked his tongue and narrowed his legs. This isn't it. The first step that Glenn had shown him was vast enough to reach anywhere in the continent, and free enough to achieve any kind of movement. It couldn't even be compared to the heavenly advance of the Supreme Harmony steps that he had just used. He said it was a step that could achieve anything. Glenn described the Supreme Harmony steps as omnipotent and well-rounded. It was such an arrogant and haughty thing to say, but it was irrefutable after witnessing the steps. I shouldn't be thinking about speed or strength. Raon's might was less than a speck compared to Glenn's. He needed to work on his foundation for the big picture rather than trying to copy him. Let's try again. Raon used the Supreme Harmony steps along with the 10,000 flames cultivation. The slow yet heavy steps looked like a fierce charging bison. This isn't right, either. Raon shook his head and corrected his posture. He repeated over and over and over and over again, and he used the Supreme Harmony steps until sunrise. Damn it. Raon frowned upon seeing the rising sun. Acquiring the Supreme Harmony steps wasn't easy, despite possessing a talent that increased his learning speed. Honestly, he felt like he was still completely clueless. No, it's probably the way it should be. The Supreme Harmony steps was a footwork incorporating the enlightenment of Glenn, the continent's strongest man. It was natural for such martial arts to be difficult to acquire. Have you still not managed to learn that footwork, despite disturbing the King of Essence's sleep to practice? You are so pathetic that you are making me cry. Wrath came out from the bracelet and laughed at him after having been silent the whole night. The King of Essence understood it right away. I'm starting to feel sorry over the human's inferiority. Okay, you're cool. Raon sighed briefly and sat down. Since his body still wasn't completely restored, he was feeling tired from practicing overnight. It's obvious you are having difficulties. You are like a worm, crawling on the ground and trying to look up into the sky. A worm should look at the worm's sky instead. A worm should look at the worm's sky, huh? Raon murmured wrath slander and looked at the North Grave Mountain, located behind the annex building. Now that I think about it. Rimmer had told him something similar in the North Grave Mountain. When he was teaching him about the attributes, he had told him Raon needed to decide the flow of his affinity by himself. I wonder if the same goes for this footwork. Raon re-examined the Supreme Harmony steps. Glenn's Supreme Harmony steps looked transcendental. It didn't look like a footwork that existed in reality, but a mysterious step that could jump over space and time. I'm not at that level, and that's not what I'm trying to achieve. He shook his head. What he wanted to achieve was something more realistic. He had only two goals. He wanted to protect the people in the annex building, and he wanted to stab Darius Robert in the throat. That was everything he wanted. And for that, Raon straightened his back and closed his eyes. He took a step while thinking about the people he needed to protect and the man he needed to kill, no matter what happened to his body. Stomp! It was a different vibration. The intense flow, starting from the mana circuit at the sole of his feet, pierced through his entire body like lightning splitting the sky. Freedom was incorporated in his body's movement. He started to draw his own picture. The picture's background was filled with the steps, incorporating the freedom that would allow him to protect his loved ones and snap the neck of his sworn enemy. Whir! Raon opened his eyes. His eyes were burning brightly, like the rising sun. He looked down on the ground. His first step hadn't moved his body, but his mind had moved. The step was the mind, a martial art that could be only acquired by putting his mind into it. The rough sketch of the Supreme Harmony steps that he wanted to finish the day was completed at once. You've acquired the Supreme Harmony steps. Supreme Harmony steps, 1 star, was added to traits. Raon clenched his fists. Upon acquiring the Supreme Harmony steps that he thought he would never manage to learn, the sense of accomplishment and exhilaration he felt was twice more than usual. The learning speed of the Supreme Harmony steps has returned to normal. The learning ability that helped him acquire the Supreme Harmony steps disappeared at the perfect timing, as soon as he finished learning it. Since the sun was slowly rising, the ability only lasted for a night. It was the right choice to come out to train immediately. If he didn't have that ability, he wouldn't have managed to acquire the Supreme Harmony steps even after a year, let alone in a day. Disregarding his injury to train was the correct answer. What is this? Wrath's coldness trembled violently. Like a candle in the wind. What have you done? How did you do that in such a short time? Your words were the key. Key? You told me that a worm should look at the worm's sky. So what? Just like you said, I have my own objective, and Glenn has his own wish and objective. That's why I don't need to copy what he did exactly. I incorporated my wish in the footwork. Raon murmured that it just worked when I did that, with a cheeky expression. Even then, you shouldn't have been able to acquire that footwork so easily. You are right. Your system was really helpful by increasing my learning speed. I'm just realizing that they were both thanks to you. I'm really grateful. The King of Essence has never done that. Rat's blue coldness puffed up and looked like it could explode at any time. Don't be so angry. I was just stating the truth. Raon smiled and wagged his finger. It was as Raon was about to provoke him even more to make him burst out in anger that he heard it. Raon! Sylvia came running out through the window behind the annex building. She looked as agile as Rimmer. I told you to rest. Why do you look like this? Ah. Raon sighed. He wasn't scared of the monarch of Devildom, but he couldn't go against his mother. Raon got dragged into Sylvia's room, and she looked angrier than wrath. Raon, what did Mom tell you? I wonder. Raon scratched the back of his head and avoided Sylvia's gaze. I see LRLY told you to stop training until you are completely recovered. Maybe you said that. He could clearly remember her telling him that, but he turned his head and tried pretending that he didn't know anything. Seriously. Sylvia wrinkled her nose with her arms crossed. Ugh. Because Sylvia was scolding him, Raon felt even more uncomfortable than when he fought against the blood-raving demon. He couldn't understand why it was so difficult to listen to her preaching. Raon! Sylvia leaned forward to meet his eyes. Her eyes were full of worries and sorrow. Raon lowered his head, unable to face that heavy expression. Yes. I know why you are trying so hard to train. She continued while caressing his shoulder. You want to become stronger because you are worried about Mom and the annex building. Raon's lip trembled slightly. Probably because she was his mother, or because she had spent a long time with him, Sylvia knew exactly what he was thinking. That's not all, though. No one should have been aware that revenge was also driving his actions. Thank you. And I'm sorry. It's all Mom's fault that you have to think that way. You don't realize how happy I was when I heard you became the top trainee, won the spar, and had a great achievement during the mission. However, Sylvia caressed his shoulder, her mouth tightly closed. You don't need to do all that for my sake. Remember what Mom told you before, you should do what you want to do for yourself, not for our sake. She smiled as she spoke. Her unruffled smile was proof of her sincerity, which touched his heart even more. I'm telling you once again, your mom is happier than ever right now, so you don't need to strain yourself. You should walk at your own pace, Raon. Over 80% of his injuries were already healed. Some exercises were actually beneficial for him in his current state, and Sylvia was also aware of that fact. However, he couldn't tell her that as he faced her gaze. I got it. Raon nodded with a throbbing heart. Promise? MHM. Great. Sylvia clapped her hands and stood up. She smiled brightly, unlike a moment before. Everyone, enter. Yes. The room's door opened following her call, and every maid in the annex building, including Helen, entered the room. Hoo-ha! Raon's jaw dropped. He was aware that the maids were standing outside, but he hadn't expected her to call him inside. You heard, right? Report to me right away if Raon tries to train or use his body for anything. Yes, my lady. The maid smiled brightly and bowed. Ha! Ha! Raon shook his head and sighed. She got me. Ha 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 ha. It feels so great to watch you being played with. Huff. Bayan sighed, the sound as heavy as a lump of lead. I'm too distracted. He couldn't help but blush upon remembering what happened the day they fought against Eden. All he had then was a loud voice, unable to do anything. Realizing that he would have died if Raon hadn't been there, he was too ashamed and embarrassed. I need to move my body. Since he didn't want to run into anyone, he went to the small training ground located in a corner of the annex building. Despite it being a small training ground, it was properly maintained. Bayan drew his sword and swung it. Whoosh! The suffocated feeling subsided with the sound of his sword cutting through the wind. Bayan kept swinging his sword, using his footwork in satisfaction. How much time had passed? When Bayan came back to his senses and raised his head, a few swordsmen and trainees could be seen in the training ground. Ha! Bayan wiped the sweat on his forehead with his sleeve and sheathed his sword. I managed to get rid of the worthless thoughts. Exercising was the correct answer, since all the distraction from before was gone. I should retoo. It was as he turned about to return to the central martial palace that he heard them. Sir Bayan. It's been a long time. They were the collateral children that didn't even go to the 6th training ground after failing the 5th training grounds exam because their pride was hurt. Are you already training after having gone through all that? As expected of Sir Bayan. The collaterals exclaimed with glittering eyes. I just came to exercise because I was frustrated. Frustrated. Ah. I see. The child with a wide forehead on the right narrowed his eyes and nodded. That story was incorrect after all. What story? The rumor that Raon killed the Green War Demon and fought against the Blood-Raving Demon, that's a fake rumor, right? I thought the same thing. There's no way that underhanded guy would have killed the Green War Demon and bought time for other people's escape. It must have been Instructor Rimmer that did all that and pretended it was all Raon's achievements. Instructor Rimmer likes him, after all. Even though Bayan hadn't said anything, they were certain that Raon had lied. That's really dirty. Those living in the annex building are all shameless. Hey! Bayan bared his teeth and glared at the two trainees. Facing his threatening pressure, the trainees flinched and blinked. Do you think Sieghart is a ragtag that gives out accomplishment without a proper investigation? Pardon? Ah, that's. Raon Sieghart killed the Green War Demon and didn't retreat a single step in front of the Blood-Raving Demon. None of the trainees, including me, would have survived if it wasn't for him. Ugh! Threatened by Bayan's growling voice, the collaterals collapsed to the ground. Bring them to me if you hear anyone spouting such bullshit in the future. I'll personally close their mouths. Ah, yes. I'm sorry. Bayan left the training ground after glaring at the trembling trainees. Ah. While he was headed towards the central martial palace, he stood still and looked up at the sky. I see. He finally realized why he felt so frustrated, and why he felt so nauseous. It's because I still couldn't accept him. He had done his best to catch up to him after realizing how much effort he had made. When he thought he had finally caught up to him, Raon was running ahead of him once again, going much faster and further than him. During the matches against the Owen Kingdom, the actual battle training against the orcs, and the mission this time, Bayan hadn't really managed to do anything special. Meanwhile, Raon's achievements had always been overwhelming. I was jealous. Despite being silent, Raon had great leadership. He could read through all situations while also possessing an excellent might. He was saying that he would catch up to him on the outside, but he was actually jealous of his abilities on the inside. Ha ha ha. He burst into laughter. Jealousy was a natural emotion for a human being. He felt comfortable after realizing that fact. I wasn't that great of a person. However, he had no intention of showing that ugly feeling on the outside. He needed to keep it on the inside and use it as fuel to catch up to Raon. I told you already that I won't give up. Bayan bit his lip. He returned to the central martial palace with lighter steps. "Young master, are you going to go practice by any chance?" Helen walked up to Raon as soon as he left his room. "I'm not." Raon shook his head and walked towards the lobby. "Young master, where are you going?" Another maid examined his clothes sharply. "I'm going on a stroll." Have a good walk." Raon waved his hand and opened the door to go outside. "Young master?" "No way, are you here to train?" "I'm not." The man that was cleaning the windows outside the annex building also asked him about training as soon as he saw him. "Young master." "Train." People he met on his way towards the garden behind the annex building kept asking him where he was going and what he was going to do, to an annoying extent. "I'm just on a stroll." "A stroll?" He grimaced at the maid hanging out the laundry in the yard and ran to the garden. Phew! Raon sighed. He was completely caught in Sylvia's trap. He wouldn't have been tricked by anyone else, but he was weak against her in many ways. It'll be impossible at this rate. The maids were taking the opportunity to hide everywhere and watch him. If he started using footwork in that situation, Sylvia would immediately come out like a cuckoo from a cuckoo clock. Well, fine. It was a relief that it happened after he finished acquiring the Supreme Harmony steps. It would have been really depressing if that happened while his learning speed was increased. I guess it won't hurt to take a break once in a while. Raon relaxed, sitting on a bench in the garden. Upon realizing he wasn't going to move, the maids also stopped watching him. "Why, young master?" As he was enjoying the refreshing wind and the smell of the grass, a maid's voice could be heard from the annex building. "We are in trouble." Raon opened his eyes and turned his head, seeing a maid on the verge of tears running towards him. Raon stood up from the bench, hearing the maid's expression and urgent voice. Sir Raden Sieghart came to visit. Raden? It was a familiar name. He was the son of Glenn's fourth son, Balder, and he apparently returned to the house recently with an achievement. Why is he here? I am not sure. He became violent towards my lady as soon as he arrived. Raon didn't hear anything else. My lady and violent, those two words were the only ones that Raon could hear. Where is that bastard? Rayon's eyes sank into darkness, just like back in the days when he was an assassin. Chapter 88. The atmosphere in the true martial palace, where Glenn Sieghart's fourth son Balder Sieghart resided, was as cold as the northern ocean. The reason was simple. Balder Sieghart's son, Raden Sieghart, had recently returned to the house. He had been in a bad mood ever since. Slam! Raden Sieghart grit his teeth and punched the wall. Damn it! He swore in frustration. He had returned after destroying one of the white blood religion's branches, yet his name wasn't being praised anywhere. It was as if his achievement had been completely forgotten. And that guy was the reason behind all that. The trash living in the annex building, Raon Sieghart, whose name was spreading throughout the house. In the banquet hall, in the training ground, and even in the cafeteria, everything was about Raon. Raon Sieghart, who had killed the Green War Demon, was the only thing people were talking about. That little fly. He couldn't control his anger. A little bug that he had never even paid attention to was overshadowing his achievements. Raden Sieghart left his room, a distorted expression of irritation on his face. Are you going out? The butler standing in front of the door bowed and asked. What else do you think I'm doing? Raden slammed the door and frowned. I will make the preparations. Please tell me your destina. I'm going to the annex building. Pardon? Why are you going there so suddenly? The butler's eyes widened upon hearing that he was going to the annex building. I'm going to check out how great the guy that outweighed my name looks. Raden's orange eyes flared up intensely. While tending the garden, Judiel kept glancing to the right, where Sylvia was personally trimming a tree. This is a really strange place. They weren't lacking maids, yet Sylvia often did the gardening work by herself despite being the master of the annex building. And Sylvia isn't the only strange one. Despite hiding their expressions, she could see it in the eyes of the maids working in other places. They usually worked reluctantly in order to live, yet the annex building was different. Everyone sincerely trusted each other as they happily did their tasks, and they considered Raon as their son or little brother. Judiel had lots of experiences working in different places as a spy, and the annex building was a peculiar and mysterious place among all of them. Ha! Judiel sighed, looking at the annex building. He is the most special person, though. She was still unable to forget the day she met the monster living in the annex building, when she had seen Raon Sieghart's true face. She still had nightmares about that night at least once a week. Ha! Cold breath came from her mouth. How can such a man exist? Raon was still in his early teens. He was at an age where he should be acting like a spoiled child and complaining about food, yet his eyes looked like he wanted to kill everything in the world. Remembering the red eyes floating on the lake still gave her goosebumps. But the way Raon behaved was different from her impression of him. He acted like a shy boy towards the people in the annex building, and he treated every single maid as his family. And she wasn't an exception. Except for when he asked her about the Central Martial Palace or Karun, he treated her the same as the other maids in the annex building. He even helped her out of her predicament recently when she was ordered to return because she was considered worthless. Judiel even wondered sometimes if she was really a double agent, and if she really had a rage worm inside of her body. He is such a great man. It felt like he was on a completely different level as a person when she compared herself to him. She was just an average human being. Though, she didn't dare betray or defy him because she was too scared of him. Phew. As Judiel sighed quietly and was about to take care of the grass, a black shoe entered her sight. Upon raising her head, she could see a middle-aged man with his hair neatly combed back. This man is... She had seen him before in the Sieghart registry. He was Merkin, the butler in charge of Raden Sieghart, belonging to the True Martial Palace. My name is Merkin, butler from the True Martial Palace. He wasn't bowing to Judiel, but to Sylvia behind her. What can I do for you? Sylvia stepped forth, putting down the gardening shears she was holding. We sent a letter yesterday. I came to check if you are ready. Letter? What letter are you talking about? You must have received a letter stating that Sir Raden Sieghart wanted to visit the annex building. I didn't get anything like that. Sylvia frowned and waved her hand. I'm sure I heard they gave it to the maids in the annex building. Raden's butler, Merkin, tilted his head. He looked flustered, but his eyes were calm. Judiel was certain that he was lying. Sylvia turned around to look at the maids. Naturally, nobody knew about the letter. When is he coming? He is arriving in 30 minutes. 30 minutes? Helen, who was standing behind Sylvia, widened her eyes and approached them. How are we supposed to prepare ourselves in that short time? We sent the letter yesterday. Raden's butler, Merkin, smiled as if he was making fun of Sylvia. We didn't receive such a letter. Even if you didn't receive one, our young master isn't really considerate about something like that. You'd better prepare as fast as possible. Merkin's expression was completely laid back. It looked like he was asking them what they could do when they were mere collaterals. A member of the direct line that was qualified as a swordsman had the same rank as a vice squad leader. It looked impossible to refuse as they were pretending to have sent a letter beforehand. TSK. Judiel silently clicked her tongue, looking at Merkin. The reason Raden was acting dirty like that was as plain as day. Raden Sieghart had recently returned with the accomplishment of destroying a branch of the white blood religion, yet he was almost forgotten because of Raon's great deeds. It was obvious that he was visiting in order to vent his anger. Pathetic men. Glenn's fourth son, Baldur Sieghart, and his sons all had violent personalities. Karun and the Central Martial Palace's swordsmen were also violent, but they weren't foolish enough to make their move in public. However, the True Martial Palace was different. They straight up picked a fight and didn't hesitate to cross the lines they shouldn't. They weren't any different from bulls charging at a red cloth. This is going to be annoying. Even among Baldur's children, Raden was famous for his negligence. He wasn't going to listen to Sylvia just because she was his aunt, so the situation was bound to become complicated. Moreover, Raon was currently in the annex building. If Raon ever harmed Sylvia or the maids, the matter was going to escalate. Helen, it can't be helped at this point. Make the preparations and tell Raon not to come out. Sylvia didn't waver despite hearing she had only 30 minutes. She stopped tending the garden and gave her orders while dusting off her clothes. Considering she mentioned Raon's name, she seemed to be aware of the reason that Raden Sieghart was visiting them. Understood. Helen bit her lip and walked towards the annex building. As Judiel was about to follow her along with the other maids, footsteps could be heard from behind her. She slowly turned her head. An elegant blond man wearing a full dress uniform was walking towards them. He had narrow shoulders, a rather slender body, and a long face and nose. He looked exactly like a thug in the back alley by the way he was walking with his hands in his pockets, dragging his shoes. He is already here. Judiel swallowed. The guy that looked like a hoodlum was Raden Sieghart. Instead of 30 minutes that Merkin had mentioned, he had already arrived in the annex building before 5 minutes had even passed. Oh no! The young master arrived earlier than I thought. Merkin winked with a nasty smile. As the saying goes, like master like butler. Spit. Raden Sieghart spat on a garden flower and stood in front of Sylvia. Shall I call you aunt? Young master, Lady Sylvia is at the rock bottom of the collateral hierarchy. You don't need to call her that. Ah, that's right. I don't need to. Raden giggled and tapped the sword around his waist. It's dirty even though I told you yesterday that I was going to visit. I guess it can't be helped since worthless people live here. He trampled the garden's flowers that Sylvia and the maids had been tending with his muddy shoes. He then spat on the road in the center. It looked like it was his habit. I'm sorry. We are cleaning up right now. Sylvia smiled at his nephew, who had reached a different level of rudeness. She was simply looking at Raden. Poof. Raden frowned in displeasure and spat on the ground once again. He came up while kicking the flowers on the right side. Are you telling me to walk on this dirty road? He frowned, spitting at the soil covering the road. Hey, clean it up right now. All right. Please wait a moment. Keeping her smile on her face, Sylvia leaned forward to personally clean up the soil. You? Both Raden and his butler Merkin were wide-eyed at the sight. They looked like they didn't expect her to endure such provocation. Was she more amazing than I thought? Judiel narrowed her eyes. Even Judiel was angry despite being a spy that only came to the annex building recently, yet Sylvia was enduring it with a smile. Judiel admired her, realizing that Sylvia was the definition of the iron hand in a velvet glove. The maids that were helping Sylvia clean up the soil had calm expressions, but they couldn't hide the way their hands trembled in anger. The reason that they were all holding back was for Raon's sake. They were enduring Raden's provocation because they didn't want Raon to cause issues with Raden. How long do I have to wait? Raden Sieghart frowned and spat once again on the soil Sylvia was cleaning up. The spit was flowing down her hand. Young master. Helen, who was heading to the annex building, came back upon witnessing that sight. Her black eyes were hazy with anger. That's too much. Even if you are a member of the direct line, the main building won't allow you to pick a fight like this in broad daylight. Since Helen had been with Sylvia ever since she was born, her head wasn't filled with reason but emotions coming from the long years they'd spent together. Helen. Aha. Raden pushed Sylvia, who was trying to block his way, aside and stood in front of Helen. Right. You are right. This is going to be troublesome. Raden stuck his hand out at Helen. He slapped her cheek with a smile. Slap. He didn't look like he was using much strength, yet Helen was pushed back until she hit a tree. Sniff. Helen trembled, grabbing her cheek. But I'm a member of the direct line of this house, which means I'm the master. Even if I do something like this, or even if I kill you, a 2-day probation in my room is all I'm going to get. Raden's pressure increased exponentially. A chill ran down Judiel's spine, as if she were looking at a beast about to devour her. Stop. As he was about to trample on Helen, Sylvia and the maids stepped in to stop him. Eat. Judith bit her lip and stuck next to Sylvia. She was planning to thrust herself into her to take the blow in her stead if that happened. You shouldn't say stop, but please stop. Ugh. Sylvia grit her teeth. She didn't back off, facing Raden's violent pressure. Clench. Judith clenched her fists. She was angry despite being a spy. It was as she was thinking of a way to stop that ruffian that she heard it. Ah! A murderous intent that made her hair stand on end burst from the annex building. She knew who it was, but she was too scared to look back. Ah, the guy I was looking for finally came out. Raden spat on the ground and grinned. Ugh! Judith reluctantly turned her head. The man with crimson flame in his red eyes was Raon, just as she had expected. He was walking towards them with an expressionless face. Threatening pressure. She couldn't help swallowing. His murderous intent isn't weak. Raon's pressure was thin. However, it wasn't because he was lacking in energy. It was because he had concentrated all his murderous intent, resulting in a small pressure. Raon Zighart. I wanted to see that great face. Whether Raden was aware of that fact or not, he grinned and pushed Sylvia and the maids standing in front of him away. Raon's expression was serene. He slowly walked towards him, mouth as firmly closed as a doll's. Clank. He drew his sword when he was less than 10 steps away from Raden. A clear sound rang out despite the situation. Oh, are you going to swing that scary thing to me? Even though I'm a member of the direct line? Raden gave a sly smile, believing that Raon would be unable to swing his sword. Direct line. Raon halted his steps and frowned. Kohaha. Thinking his words were effective, Raden burst into laughter and walked towards Raon. I'm Raden Zighart, the son of the true Martial Palace's master, Baldur Zighart. So what? Raon's sword stormed down at Raden like red lightning. Chapter 89. Raden Zighart smiled broadly upon arriving at the annex building. Soil was everywhere on the road because Sylvia and the maids in the annex building were tending the garden. It's perfect for picking a fight. The butler Merkin, who went before him, must have talked to them about the letter he never sent. Since it wasn't cleaned up despite a member of the direct line visiting them, there were countless ways to mess with them. Until he comes out. He was visiting that small and dirty place in order to humiliate Raon Zighart and make him kneel. He was going to keep provoking him until he started fighting him. Sylvia approached him. Her eyes were calm despite knowing that he was there to cause a scene. Raden laughed at the woman that would have been his aunt if she stayed in the house, provoking her. However, her reaction was dull. Even though he spoke to her rudely, spat at her and trampled on the carefully raised flowers with his dirty shoes, she didn't yield to his provocations. Sylvia's patience exceeded his expectations, and her expression was too calm, to the point that it was scary. Damn it! Raden's mouth became thinned. Directly attacking Sylvia could be dangerous, even for him. I can't return like this. As he was thinking about what to do, he noticed the maids cleaning up the soil with Sylvia. Their expressions were composed, but they couldn't hide their trembling hands. That's it. He got a grasp on how he could provoke her, since the maids couldn't control their minds as well as Sylvia. Caw, spit. Raden grinned and spat on Sylvia's hand as she was cleaning up the ground. The oldest maid flipped out upon seeing that. That's too much. Even if you are a member of the direct line, the main building won't allow you to pick a fight like this in broad daylight. Just as he expected, she was successfully provoked and said things she shouldn't have. Slap. Pushing away Sylvia as she tried to stop him, Raden walked up to the maid and slapped her cheek. Just as she said, the Department of Justice wouldn't let the matter slide, but probation was all he was going to get since he was a member of the direct line. You really don't know your place. You are nothing but trash in this house. He giggled. It was as he was about to trample on the trembling maid that it happened. With threatening pressure, a boy appeared from the annex building. His facial features were so serene that they could be called perfect. That bastard is Raon Zighart. He became even more irritated upon seeing his handsome face. Clank. Raon drew his sword. There's no way a brat that can't even control his murderous intent would have killed the green war demon and fought against the blood-raving demon. How laughable. Raon stopped walking right under his nose. He only sneered despite having seen him drawing his sword, since there was no way he would swing it. Oh, are you going to swing that scary thing to me? Even though I'm a member of the direct line? His eyes looked like he was still retaining his sanity. As he was about to provoke him even more, Raon opened his mouth. So what? Even before the word reached his ears, a red light sparked in front of his eyes. He gasped. He tried to step back in shock, but it was too late. His sword was already dashing towards his neck. Crash! He didn't know what to do and closed his eyes. A powerful crashing sound could be heard from right in front of him. When he opened his eyes, he saw his butler Merkin defending him. However, Raon didn't stop. Without missing the opportunity created by Merkin being unable to completely nullify the shock, he thrust his fist. Crack! Merkin collapsed backward upon receiving a direct hit to his temple, his body trembling. Why, you crazy bastard? Do you realize who you have just attacked? I do. Raon's voice wasn't trembling in the slightest. He was seriously intending to kill him. You are a robber that trespassed into my territory. Bullshit. I'm the real master of this house. This isn't your house. He swung his sword again while spewing more lunacy. Fine. I was just going to play around, but I'll rip your head off now. Raon thrust his sword. He was planning to deflect Raon's sword and pierce his neck. However, a mysterious rotation emerged from Raon's sword and pushed back his sword instead. What the hell? He barely managed to deflect Raon's blow by twisting his sword while stepping back. Whoosh! As if Raon was expecting it, he approached him and slashed diagonally. Coo! Raon groaned. His hand was trembling from blocking Raon's blow. It was difficult to regain his advantage when he started losing. How dare you attack a member of the direct line? You and your mother will be punished to death. I just need to behead you before that happens. A threatening strike grazed his shoulder while he said that. Clank! He barely managed to block the sword aimed at his neck. Coo! What the hell is this guy? There was no opening in Raon's swordsmanship as it stormed at him like a tidal wave. Even though the provocation had certainly worked, Raon was the one that was being disrupted. Damn it! He wanted to gather his aura from his energy center to counterattack, but Raon wasn't giving him the time to do that. He had no choice but to defend until the end. Time, I just need time. If only he had the time to use his aura, he could kill a guy like that in an instant. And that was why he wasn't giving him any time at all. Raon gritted his teeth. It can't be helped. He needed to escape, even if he would be injured in the process. He forcefully gathered the aura from his energy center while blocking Raon's sword. Rumble. It felt extremely painful, as if his mana circuit was being burned out, but a powerful aura surrounded his body. It's over. You crazy bastard. Puffing up the muscles of his lower and upper body, he attacked with his aura gathered on his blade. The strike was powerful enough to cut through Raon and his sword at once. However, Raon disappeared from his sight right before the blow hit him. Gasp! It felt like he was hallucinating. He couldn't even begin to grasp where he was gone. You are the one that's finished. He got goosebumps upon hearing Raon's voice from behind him. He quickly turned around, but his fist was already touching his abdomen. Slam! He was bent double at the powerful shock. You! It's not over yet. Raon's sword was rushing towards his heart. Wah! Terrified by the blade thrust at him like a ray of light, Raon closed his eyes and screamed. Raon couldn't pierce Raon's heart. He stopped his sword right before he reached his chest. There were two reasons. First, Sylvia was shouting at him to stop, and the second was because there were two swordsmen from the Heavenly Blade Division, under the head of House's direct command, standing in front of Raon. Did you finally come out despite having done nothing when Helen was being beaten? The Heavenly Blade swordsman didn't react despite Raon's threatening voice. Please step back. They lowered their posture, expressing their intention to protect Raon and hardened the wall. Wah! Realizing he had survived, Raon fell to the back. He pointed his finger at Raon while drooling. Kill him. Kill that crazy bastard. What are you doing? That mud attacked me, a member of the direct line. The Heavenly Blade swordsmen didn't move despite Raon's order. They were just standing still, like statues. Move aside. Please step back. Ha! Raon gathered his aura and steamed out between his teeth. The Heavenly Blade swordsmen were different from Raon's butler. They weren't opponents he could win against with a surprise attack. Raon, stop. Young master. As he was about to use the 10 flames of the 10,000 flames cultivation, Sylvia and Helen came up to him and grabbed his arms. The anger filling his head and heart melted away like snow in the spring upon seeing their wavering eyes. Why, you damn bastards? Do you realize who I am? Raon screamed and stood up. I'm the true Martial Palace Master's son. Kill that bastard. No, I'm killing him. Get out of my way. Young Master Raon, please step back. The Heavenly Blade swordsman on the right turned around to stop Raon. They were separating Raon and Raon. We only listen to the head of house's command. Please step back, both of you. You are just dogs guarding the house. I was beaten up by him. Raon grit his teeth and raised his sword. As he was about to attack the Heavenly Blade swordsman using all his aura, his butler Merkin, who had been unconscious, ran up to him and grabbed his shoulder. Why, young master, please stop. Shut up. The way he was grinding his teeth and rampaging resembled a rabid dog. Young master, this is rather. Merkin whispered to Raon and he slowly stopped swinging his limbs. Let me go. Raon pushed Merkin away and met Raon's eyes past the Heavenly Blade swordsman. Raon Zighart. His eyes glowed like those of a beast. I'm going to make you experience humiliation and pain worse than death. Just you wait. Same goes for me. Crimson lightning sparked from Raon's eyes. I'm never going to forget what you did here. You'd better fix your habit of closing your eyes when you were scared, since your head could get sent flying at any time. You damn insect. You would have already been 6 feet under if it wasn't for that surprise attack. Raon burned in lunacy and tried to pounce at him, but he could only flounder his limbs around, blocked by Merkin. Why, young master? We have to leave now. I'll never forgive you. I'll destroy the annex building itself. Young master. Merkin left the annex building, forcefully dragging Raon out. The Heavenly Blade swordsmen relaxed from their defensive posture a long time after Raon and Merkin had left, then walked up to Raon. This matter will be reported to the head of house. You should prepare an explanation. Is that advice? I thought you didn't care about anyone other than the direct line. Raon, stop. Sylvia's hand, holding his right arm, tightened. Raon clicked his tongue and sheathed his sword. The Heavenly Blade swordsman didn't respond, silently leaving after bowing. My lady, young master. I am sorry. I couldn't hold myself back, despite my age. Helen knelt in front of Raon and Sylvia. That's not true. You gave me so much courage just by stepping up. Sylvia looked like all her strength was gone, but she made Helen stand with a smile. It's not Helen's fault. Raon nodded. The source of the problem was still shamelessly existing, so there was no reason for her to apologize for doing nothing wrong. Raon. Sylvia hugged Raon from behind. You've become really strong. I felt really reassured when you stood in front of Mom. Her voice was both laughing and crying at the same time. Don't worry about this matter. Mom will take care of it. No, He turned around, trying to stop her, but he couldn't speak because Sylvia was grabbing his shoulder tightly. It's alright, just trust your mom. After saying that, Sylvia started to clean up the dirty ground, the trampled flowers and grass. Her peaceful expression was making the color return to the frightened maids' faces. She is strong. Sylvia should have been the most anxious of them all, yet she was reassuring the others instead. Her heart was sturdier than anyone there, either because she was a mother or because she was strong to begin with. However, Raon closed his eyes while cleaning up the dirty areas with Sylvia. I have to solve this problem. His experience and instincts were telling him the same thing. He was the one who could solve the issue, not Sylvia. And he had no intention of letting that bastard off the hook after he insulted Sylvia and hit Helen. No one noticed, but Raon's crimson eyes were shining more intensely than ever. Chapter 90. Raon returned to his room after finishing cleaning up the garden and looking after Sylvia, Helen, and all the maids. Knock knock. Knock. Once he finished changing his dirty clothes, a quiet knocking sound could be heard. Enter. Judiel opened the door and entered, then bowed her head. Explain the situation. Yes. While we were tending the garden with my lady, Raden Sieghart's butler, Merkin, visited us. He said he had sent a letter saying that they would visit us today and asked us about the preparation. She reported what happened without missing a single detail, from Merkin to Raden. And Sir Raon arrived as Sir Raden was about to trample on Madame Helen. Judiel bowed as she finished speaking. I see. Raon nodded. Her description wasn't much different from what he expected. By the way, Sir Raon. Judiel raised her head and called Raon's name. What's up? It's a bit awkward for me to say this, but Sir Raon shouldn't have interfered today. Raden and his father, Baldur Sieghart, are people who don't consider the consequences. Her expression was as stiff as tree bark. I'm sure they are going to attack the annex building and Sir Raon using various methods. Even though Raden offended us first, they are members of the direct line, and we are collaterals. It's perfectly obvious whose side the house is going to take. Raon didn't open his mouth and watched Judiel until she finished speaking. If you think I'm overstepping my bounds. I don't. Raon shook his head. I'm grateful to you. Pardon? You tried taking Raden's kick instead of Helen and my mother. Judiel was sticking right next to Sylvia and Helen when Raden raised his foot, shoving her body into it. She was trying to get kicked instead of the others. Even Judiel herself didn't think she would do that. That was unintentional. Judiel blushed and lowered her head. Losing to affection as a spy was such a laughable thing to do. But the people in the annex building were the only ones that had treated her as a human being, despite being Sieghart's smallest and most persecuted place. It couldn't be helped that she felt affection towards them, even though she was still afraid of Raon. You are right. It would have been best to not yield to his provocation, but it already happened. I have my plans against him, so don't worry about it. Understood. Since Raon said she didn't need to worry, she felt like her upset stomach was eased entirely. That was how much trust his voice filled her with. However, she was still worried about something. This is troublesome. It seemed she took more of a liking to the annex building's residents than she thought. Is there anything I can do? Gather information about Raden and Baldur. Things like their personalities and their achievements so far. Understood. She bowed her head then left the room. Raon licked his lips, looking at the closed door. That was unexpected. Judiel's emotions towards Raon were those of fear and doubt, yet she was fond of the people in the annex building. It looked like even she wasn't sure about her emotions. It looked like he could easily obtain her sincerity if he kept looking after her in the annex building. However, he felt a bit guilty about continuing to lie to her after witnessing her trying to protect Sylvia and Helen. But that's not important right now. Raon raised his clenched fist. He wasn't actually planning to confront Raden in the beginning. Since he had already expected it to happen, he had planned to grasp the situation first, then crush him with words. However, his mind went blank when Sylvia and Helen were about to be struck, and that bastard's face was the only thing that entered his sight. Wrath. That was right. He couldn't control his emotion, boiling with an unbearable wrath. The funny part was that he remained calmer than ever concerning the fight. It was a mysterious emotion in various ways. A strange mixture of wrath and reason. You are well aware of it. Wrath burst from the bracelet with an excited voice. Was that your doing, after all? What are you talking about? I'm talking about when I couldn't control my wrath. No. That was your fault. Wrath grinned from inside the cold flame. What? It was the effect of the wrath that you have accepted before. But I'm usually. Do you usually go crazy with anger? Of course not. The same goes for the King of Essence's emotions. It's usually calm, yet it will pierce into you and try to control you the moment you get angry. Damn it. Raon bit his lip. The trade with that self-proclaimed king was more dangerous than he thought. He resolved to never accept his emotion again. Do you think that is possible? Wrath smiled, realizing his thought. Humans are weak in various ways. And the same goes for you, who the King of Essence deems somewhat special. What are you trying to say? You aren't going to make any request despite having a god who can grant your wish right next to you, huh? How laughable. You are going to ask the King of Essence for a trade, whether it is for your own sake or for the others, and eventually. He smiled without finishing his sentence, but Raon could make a guess. I will never give my body to you. The King of Essence can already see the future where you offer your body on your own accord. It's already too late. Ha! Raon exhaled and used the ring of fire. The feeling of refreshing water running through his veins cleared his mind. It was more dangerous to get emotional than taking on Wrath's attacks. He needed to keep his cool no matter what. Poof. Raon calmed his emotions with Ring of Fire and Wrath returned to the bracelet, murmuring that it was no fun. The Ring of Fire really is important. What he needed to defend himself against Wrath wasn't a sword or a spear, but the Ring of Fire. It was necessary to level it up as quickly as possible. Raon cultivated the Ring of Fire overnight, and a knocking sound could be heard once again. This is the information on Baldur and Radin that you requested. As Raon opened the door, Judiel handed over a thin stack of documents. Considering the ink on it was still not dried, it seemed she had written it personally. Good job. Yes. I'll be leaving, then. Judiel bowed and left. Raon checked her documents from the beginning to the end in one sitting. This is quite. Raon exclaimed. The document was made on the spot, yet it was well organized. All the information he currently needed, including Radin and Baldur's personalities and temperaments, were all written down. That's pretty useful. It looked like he could use her as an informant if she couldn't be a double agent anymore. Raon read the documents over and over while rotating the Ring of Fire. The night passed as such, and once the sun rose a third knock sounded on his door. When he opened the door, he found Sylvia with wavering eyes and Glenn's butler, Ren. Raon. Young master, please excuse me so early in the morning. Ren bowed with an unusually cold expression. The head of house has summoned the young master. Raon went to the Lord's manor, leaving Sylvia, who was persistently trying to follow him, behind. Young master. Ren turned when he was in front of the steps to the Lord's manor. His eyes were filled with curiosity as he looked at him. You must be aware of the reason that the head of house has summoned you. Aren't you anxious? I'm aware of the reason, naturally. However, I'm not really anxious. Raon shook his head with composed eyes. I see. Ren smiled lightly and entered the Lord's manor. It might have been his imagination, but he looked satisfied with his answer. As he entered the Lord's manor behind Ren, a heavy atmosphere weighed down on him. It felt like gravity had grown twice as strong in that place. Raon breathed slowly, just like when he was meditating. The heaviness pressuring his shoulders subsided slightly. The swordsmen and servants looked at him with indescribable gazes, but Raon proudly stood in front of the audience chamber. They are also in there, on top of the head of house. Are you ready? Raon nodded plainly at Ren's question. I'm opening the door. He signaled the guard with his gaze, and the audience chamber's door started to open. There were 3 people under the radiant lighting of the audience chamber. Glenn Sieghart was sitting at the throne on the platform, exuding an overwhelming pressure. And the 2 men standing under him were Radin Sieghart and his father, Baldur Sieghart. Unlike Radin, Balder had a thick body with wide shoulders. Raon wouldn't have thought of them as father and son if he didn't know their names. However, he had the same nasty eyes as his son. Raon was glaring at him as if he wanted to kill him, and Balder frowned as if he was looking at an insect. "Greeting, my lord." Raon ignored their gazes, walking up to the center and kneeling. "Rise." "Yes." Strength almost left his legs upon hearing his icy voice, but he grit his teeth and stood up. He stepped back to stand in the same line as Balder and Raon, then looked up at Glenn. "I heard an unsavory event happened yesterday." He raised his chin from the hand it had been resting on, looking down on everyone with indifferent eyes. "My lord." "I will explain." Raon stepped forward and knelt. "Go ahead." "Yes." Upon receiving Glenn's permission, Raon looked back at Raon and grinned. Upon returning to the house after a long time, I noticed news about Raon was spread everywhere. Since I had never spoken to him before despite having seen him a few times, I sent a letter to the annex building beforehand. I went to the annex building at the designated date, but they hadn't made any preparations. Instead, their garden was in a complete mess as if they wanted to throw away their guest. Raon wrinkled his nose as if he felt really mortified from the experience. I felt bitter and raised my voice a little, and the annex building's maids immediately started nitpicking my behavior. Raon appeared when the voices started getting louder, and immediately swung his sword at me without saying anything. It wasn't a diversion or a threat, he really was trying to kill me. I kept defending while controlling my strength, but his sword was aimed at my throat until the very end. Raon's voice sounded realistic enough to make people believe that he was the victim. Raon Zighart. Glenn hadn't changed in the slightest, despite hearing Raon's emotional voice. He called Raon with the exact same voice as before. "Yes." "Is that true?" "No." Raon shook his head with composed eyes. "There's not a single truth from the beginning to the end. Especially the part about him controlling his strength, it's laughable. The sight of him turning red to shout at me still lingers before my eyes. Ugh. You damn bastard." Raon grabbed his shoulder, but Raon didn't look back. "Young Master Raon." Ren's eyes, as he stood back on the left side, grew as threatening as a blade. "Did you perhaps forget whose presence you are standing in?" "Coup." Raon swallowed and took his hand off Raon's shoulder. "If the two people's testimonies are different, then I shall call the witness that saw everything." Glenn flicked his finger, looking at Raon and Raon. A black shape came down in front of Raon with a thud. "Raquel from the Heavenly Blade Division is greeting my lord." "Report what happened yesterday." "Yes." The Heavenly Blade swordsman that introduced himself as Raquel was the man who had blocked Raon's sword the day before. He stood up after nodding, then started speaking. Young Master Raon said he sent a letter beforehand, but such a letter had never arrived at the annex building. Lady Sylvia was tending the garden like always along with her maids. Raon narrowed his eyes. Raquel was telling him the truth without a single lie, despite his expectations. Raon Zighart. Glenn frowned after hearing the whole story from Raquel. "Ah. Yes, yes." Raon trembled and rammed his head against the ground. "It's quite different from what you said." That's. "Father." As Raon trembled, unable to say anything, Balder, who had just been watching until then, frowned and stepped forward. "That's not the important part right now. The biggest problem of this incident is the fact that a collateral swung his sword at a member of the direct line. This endangers the house's hierarchy itself." That's right. "He tried to kill me with his sword." Raon nodded violently upon finding an opening. "That's true. A collateral's attack against a member of the direct line isn't just a matter of bad manners. However." Glenn nodded and stood up from the throne. His presence exploded like a giant stretching. "What do you think the difference between direct line and collateral is?" "Pardon?" That's. "It's the responsibility. Zieghart's direct line has to bear the responsibility as the true master of the house." The entire Lord's manor started trembling at the yellow energy flowing out from his shoulders. "You must remember that you are Zieghart's master in every single action and every single word you speak. It's the same even when you want to tease or degrade a collateral. If that's your intention, you have to thoroughly trample upon them until the very end. However, you had your life threatened by a collateral, and a child younger than you on top of that. That's not true. Raon's head would have already been separated from his body if that was my intention. Shame on you. You shall shut your mouth if you were saved by others twice in a row. Coo. Facing Glenn's freezing gaze as it gave him goosebumps, Raon grit his teeth. Raon Zighart. Yes. You don't seem to realize your own position either. You are a collateral, which means you need to be careful about your behavior. Swinging your sword at a member of the direct line with a swordsman's qualification is the same as a dog biting its owner. If you received unfair treatment, you should have informed the main building instead of trying to solve it by yourself. I apologize. Raon closed his eyes and lowered his head. Since there was a problem with both of you, I'm going to punish each of you accordingly. Father. You can't just punish him. You shouldn't let him live. He is going to bare his fangs against the direct line one day. You need to execute him immediately. Boulder Zighart stepped forward once again. He raised his voice, pointing his finger at Raon. Silence. If you overlook this incident, the structure between the direct line and collateral will collapse and the house's reputation will be. Boulder, I told you to shut your mouth. Coo. Facing Glenn's voice crushing the space, it looked like Boulder's huge body was squashed for a moment. My lord. In the midst of the atmosphere squeezing his heart, Raon raised his head to look at Glenn. He lowered his head and called his name. What is it? I will accept any punishment you deem fit. However, I still have something to do before that. Something to do? Yes. Raon Zighart insulted my mother and used violence against the maids. I still haven't made him pay for that. You crazy bastard. The same goes for me. I still remember you swinging your sword with those rabid red eyes. I'll definitely cut your head off. Raon Zighart, Raon Zighart. Glenn called Raon and Raon's names with serious eyes. Crushing pressure was emanating from his entire body. I just told you to know your place. That's the reason why. Raon grit his teeth and straightened his back. The head of house referred to this place as the swordsman's ground. I think a warrior should prove his worth with his sword. Raon's determined voice resounded throughout the lord's manor. I request a sword duel.